Alright guys, today's video is about building a desk in the flow of sanding chairs. I don't know if you guys remember, this beauty right here is what I built with my dad. So he has a little kind of like atelier, as the French would say it. And I went to his spot and we basically started measuring, cutting wood, and doing all kinds of like fun stuff for 3 days until it was done. And I basically took it down and connected it, made him a video of it, and that was it. But one thing specific, I was basically just, at one point we started sanding chairs. He had this, like, while we were waiting for the wood to be cut and finished, he basically was like, what are we going to do now? I have chairs to be sanded down. And me and him started sanding chairs. And thus, the actual building a desk and the flow of sanding chairs. One beautiful thing when working with like the most mundane of activities is the simple flow you get. Because funny enough, even though it's just like a chair and like you're sanding paper on it, it's a lot of work for a long period of time in order for you to get like the things, the smoothness you want. And he was using a piece of wood basically. The chairs were built with wood that was soft, which basically if I use my finger and like hit on it like this, literally, this movement will create dents. And so I had to be careful when it came to many things, including kind of like nudging the chairs in an awkward way and just kind of like spoil. Like maybe like an extra like 2, 3 strokes would actually create like a curve. It's not as deep as I make it look, but like just kind of like just removes the straight line, just like takes it away. So the flow of sanding chairs. So repetitive behavior, and that's kind of like okay. So like Bruce Lee talks about, I fear not a man who has practiced 1,000 kicks, but a man who's practiced one kick 1,000 times. And that's basically establishing the base of that one kick and then repeating it until perfection hits, or until basically you level up your way of like kicking it. So it's the same with like sanding chairs, because ultimately like your stroke has to like have, the more you kind of like sand, the more you kind of realize the force shifts from like the initial sanding and the end sanding, and then basically you have to create a consistency with that so you have a smooth, straight go brush. Let's call it a brush. I don't know what the movement of sanding a chair is. And so with each stroke, basically, you kind of like change your approach. And that is a state of deep focus. Because what you're noticing are like the smaller, finer details of something that's so easy to do, which is kind of like applying pressure and moving. And I did that, and after 2 hours, I kind of like looked up, and it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours, where I was like completely just focused on the chair, looking at everything. And at one point, I kind of like looked up, and my dad was just staring at me, and I was like, "What's up?" And he goes like, "It's hard work, isn't it?" And I go like, now I'm coming out of it." Like I had just finished an hour and a half worth of sanding, and the minute the chair looked like it was kind of done, that's when I was like, "Ah, all right, I'm done." And then I took a step back, and I realized like my back was a certain kind of way, my like feet were like angled a certain kind of way. It was like the whole movement, the times where I shifted, where I tried to think of the chair to be different, all of it started coming back to me. It's like when you're in the flow state, you don't really notice these things. You kind of like just do what needs to be done and like try your, I don't want to say try your best, because when you're in a flow state, you're at your best, and your best is kind of like improving on itself. So step by step, step by step, step by step, I kind of like just did a bit more, a bit more, a bit more. With every stroke, I did a bit more. By the end of it, it was like I'd look at a chair and I'd understand completely where I'd want to start because I did two chairs that day. And the first chair is what I'm trying to describe right now. By the second chair, I knew exactly when to start, where to start, I knew exactly how to start stroking, I knew exactly how many papers I wanted, and basically, of course, naturally, like I had an idea of how many papers I wanted, where to start, where to stroke. I didn't have that before. Before, I just started at one place and tried to kind of like find some balance. And so the experience of this, the same with when the wood came the next day and we were starting, we had to cut the wood, we had to like check the pieces, we had to like drill in the right holes and everything like this. And they're all kind of like, we had to drill, I think, over like 16 holes in this one, more. We had to drill about like 48 holes or something in this one, in the table behind me. And so how the first hole was, the second hole was different than the first hole, and by the third hole, by the last holes, it was just like, like it was just kind of like a fluid movement, but still within the same flow. Because the flow itself was not really what I'm doing, it was everything that needed to be done. I've never explained it this way. It's a funny state. Jordan Peterson describes it. He reflects on basically like Jesus talks about finding heaven here on earth. And the whole idea behind what he was talking about was the doing what you want to do. And Jordan Peterson basically points out that that's the flow state. And that flow state is basically just kind of like a heavenly feeling where you're completely away from yourself, just like observing yourself doing something. You're completely entrenched in the present moment. I think this video is just me re-evaluating or reminiscing maybe, or just kind of like honestly reflecting on the small things that happened. That was like 3, 4 months ago. No, that was in May, 2 months and a half ago, 3 months ago. Just being able to kind of like properly explore my actions in a way that allows me to get into it again. So if I were to remember the last flow state I was in, the last flow state I was in was last week when I was like setting up a feature for the app. And my feature basically was about hours. Because like you have to adjust for opening hours, closing hours of entities. And what I found myself basically doing is after like 1 hour, I was like, I've done enough. But then I was like, but I can finish it today. And I just kind of like kept on it and 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 on it. It was just an extra hour, but it didn't really matter because it was literally just like do this and do this and do this and do this. Granted, in that flow state, I had forgotten one thing. And the next day, I was debugging the whole thing until it clicked again. I was like, oh, I should have done this because I thought like the work from the day before was done. I think that's maybe some arrogance because I actually like was observing myself in the flow state. But it is really those smaller tasks that kind of piggyback on top of each other that give you that momentum and allow you to kind of like have a bird's eye view on what you're doing and how you're doing it. That is practically like the true essence of us observing our work or looking at our work through a different set of eyes. Because normally what we're doing is we're deciding things, we're interfering with what should happen, or we're making decisions of how to start or something like this. Yet the honest flow state is just like basically giving you what it needs as you're actually like processing it. This video kind of calmed me down a bit more. I was a bit stoic today, but I didn't drink as many coffees as I normally. It's a good day today. I decided a couple of things. Flowy day. I've been sleeping more over the past 4 days, but normally anytime I sleep more, it's because I'm getting over something. Or maybe it's just the heat, but I'm not going to give credit to the heat for making me collapse. Or no, guys, how would you describe a flow state that you were in at one point? I would love to actually like hear about your experiences, or just at least just a brief description of what it felt like for you to kind of be building on top of something and seeing it kind of like in front of you, just explore itself through you. The video, yeah?